What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 791. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, we got a slow format.
Oh, it has been amazing. I've actually been really enjoying this format. Going in, we had our concerns, right? We thought this was going to be blazing fast with the speed mechanic, and it turns out it's probably one of the slowest formats we've seen in the last year. And games go long, and I have been having a lot of fun.
Same. We got a lot to talk about here. Of course, when a format throws us a bit of a curveball like this, that's going to change a lot of the way that we approach things. And we're going to get you up to speed and up to date about what's going on in Aetherdrift on the Format Overview Show today. Before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. Thank you so much for your support there. Also, Ultimate Guard. They're the place to go to get the very best stuff in the business. I'm talking about deck boxes, sleeves, binders, backpacks, long boxes, ways to protect your cards, your decks, and your collection. And they make premium stuff. Some of it's branded with some of your favorite IP. Some of it is, just a color or whatever it is. You can pick. You can find all their stuff at ultimateguard.com. You can buy it at your favorite online retailer or your favorite local game store. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. Let me check something really quick here, Paul. I put up a new thing for our Patreon question of the week thread, but I did it while we were doing the show notes. So, and our listeners, viewers, whatever, they have hooked us up. So this is nice. Let's see. Here's one about Aetherdrift. So we can just take this one here from David. I'm going to post it into our show notes for antiquity. All right, David says, Aetherdrift draft seems very grindy due to lots of creature combat at the start. What's your personal opinion on the pace of the games, and do you think it's too grindy? Oh, do you know who you're asking this, David? I've had some success with green-based aggro decks, but it's still early. Thanks, guys. What's your personal opinion on the pace of the games, and do you think it's too grindy, Paul? That's the question.
Well, I will say the pace of the game has slowed down considerably. That's not to say that you should just ignore the early games entirely, but a lot of what happens in this format now is there are lots of incredible defensive creatures that exist, death touch, reach, and all that stuff. So you really need to find ways to get edges by just getting more value than your opponents. So the games do get long, the games do get grindier, but you know what? You just need to adjust kind of how you draft accordingly. I think a lot of people, if they drafted the way that they drafted maybe sets over the last, in 2024, you're going to lose a lot in the beginning because you're going to be taking the 2-drops. You're going to make, there were formats where you need 9 2-drops. You need to make sure you curve out. If you miss your 2-drop, the game is over. That is not the case in this format. And it is more important to make sure that you always have stuff to do with your mana. That is king. And if you run out, I basically feel like I'm losing the game because if my opponent's doing things and I'm not, it's just so hard to push through damage where running out of things, you might as well just be sitting there. There's just not much you can do. So just adjust kind of your approach to the format. If it has exhaust, if there's an activated ability, if it's a card draw spell, value those higher, maybe a full letter grade, maybe 2/3 of a letter grade higher than you would normally, and I think you'll have more success.
What's your do you think it's too grindy, Paul? Personal opinion here.
Absolutely not. So I will. The games are far more complicated. It is very complicated because the board stalls. The boards get to the point where both players will have 5 creatures in play. There's a lot of varying power and toughness, reach, speed. There's a lot that you need to track, but I love that stuff, right? And for me, that I feel like I get a bigger edge the more complicated the games are, but I can also see it being a little intimidating for newer players, right? Because we're coming off of foundations, which kind of water things down a little bit. And now we're just going straight back into just a world where there's just a lot of things that you need to track. So it's a lot, especially for newer players. So I can understand that this might not be the most appealing for newer players. But for me, somebody who's been playing this game for over 25 years, bring it on.
Bring it on. And that's what we're saying here. on this show today. Thank you, David, for the question. And again, if you are a Patreon supporter, that's how you get access to the Patreon question of the week thread. That's it. Just any supporter at any level, you'll get to see that thread and you can put your questions in there as well. Let's do a couple of crack-a-packs, as is custom here, Paul, to start to get our head around it. Then we're going to talk about format speed, which we just touched on there, but we'll go a little bit deeper into it. Then we'll talk about the colors, what's doing well and what color pairs are doing well. I want to touch on vehicles, and then we're going to do some individual card discussion to wrap up the show as well. So first crack-a-pack of Aetherdrift. And by the way, I am going to read, there's a foil that gets populated here, and chat told me that that's actually represented on Arena as well. I had been skipping it because I thought it was like the draft simulator thing trying a little too hard, but apparently that card counts too, so we will be reading that as well. And with that in mind, I will start with the commons, though. The first one is Howler's Heavy. This is a 3 and a blue 3/4, but you can cycle it for 1 and a blue. And when you do, when you cycle it, target creature or vehicle an opponent controls gets -3, -0 until end of turn. So that's kind of cool. By the way, you can target a vehicle with it.
Yeah,
like when it's not a creature.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't think that there's not too many ways to do something beyond that, because there's not a destroy target creature with power 2 or less type effect. But it is interesting that you can't do that. But I will say, this is a card that we had rated pretty poorly, just because 4 mana for a 3/4 creature is quite bad. But 2 mana for this type of combat trick has actually overperformed for me. So I think we had this at like a D level common, and I revised that. And I'm going to put this kind of more in the C- C level tier, C- probably, where I actually do not mind playing some copies of this. We can get into it a little bit later, but I will just say that basically there's a lot of good death touch creatures that exist that actively perform very well in this format, notably the Engine Rat and the Venom Sack Lagak. And having a combat trick that basically lets you kill a death touch creature and draw a card out of the deal is actually quite nice. So this is obviously something that's much better in the cycling deck if you draft a blue-red deck, but even in any blue deck, it's fine to play a copy of this card. Yeah,
definitely. And the stats aren't so terrible that if you do cast it, you feel bad. But the fact that it cycles it, you get the card. I mean, there are many scenarios where your opponent blocks with a small death touch creature and you get to kill it and draw a card. I mean, that's a premium combat trick. So there you go. Next is Dynamite Diver. This is the red 1/1. It's a pilot. So it, pilots stuff bigger than it +2. And when it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target.
Yeah, I thought this might potentially be one of the best 1-drops in the format, and it's just not. And that's so just nice. A testament to the speed of the format. This format is just not particularly fast. In a quick format, this just does kind of everything you'd like. If an aggressive vehicles deck was good and pushed, this is exactly what you would want, right? This is a 1-drop. It beats down. If you can get to max speed early, this helps you, and then this cruise anything that you want. So in theory, this card feels like it should play out pretty well, like a C-level card. But like I said, the creatures are just too big in this format, and just playing an aggressive vehicle strategy just has proven to not be the most successful thing. So this piloting thing doesn't actually even matter all that much. So I just don't like this card very much.
Yeah, it almost never kills the thing that's going to kill you.
Right.
At the time that you need to. Next is Deathless Pilot. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 zombie pilot. Also has the pilot ability. And you can pay a whopping 3 and a black to return it from your graveyard back to your hand.
So
this is still too slow, right?
It is still too slow, and it's still not great, but it is a little bit better than what we said initially, just because it's still something to do, but it is not a good thing to do. Where this card really shines is like a green-black deck, where you just randomly mill it with a Pothole Mole or something, and then you just get a little bit of extra value, right? Like you bring this back into play, and oftentimes the Golgari decks will have higher-end vehicles that have pretty high crew costs, and when you play this card, it basically crews everything, right? Crews things with crew or saddle 4 or greater. So it's a fine card in those type of decks, but certainly never a type of card that you're taking very highly. It's kind of a 23rd card, filler card in the decks that you play it.
That's how it's played out for me, although I will say that I have seen it return to hand and replayed.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I think I would have guessed I wouldn't have seen that very often, and I already have. Next is Alacrian Jaguar. This is the 4 and a green 4/4 vigilance, and whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and the saddle cost is 1. This is the weak point in the green common lineup, right? I mean, this card just has not made an impact.
It might be green's worst common. It's and what's funny, we're talking bad about this card, but green is insane. We'll get into it later. It is by far the best color in my opinion, but this is not it. This is 5 mana for a 4/4 vigilance. It's interesting because you can crew something small and all of a sudden you have a 5 mana 6/6 vigilance. But there's just a lot of other just larger, better green creatures that you can play in this format. This is just not the payoff that you want.
It is kind of funny too, because I mean, there's literally like the 4-drop is just straight up better than this card.
Yeah.
Like it's actually, it's not better for a 4-drop. It's just better. Like 4/4 reach trample with exhaust is just better than Alacrian Jaguar, and it costs a full mana less. That's not a good thing for the 5-drop here. Next is Lotus Guard Disciple. This is the 2 and a white 2/2 flyer. And when it enters, target creature or vehicle gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn.
Yeah, nope. I mean, it's just a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. This format, like there's just a lot of reach creatures. It doesn't really hit hard enough. And the format's also not really about racing your opponents. So the lifelink doesn't matter that much either. Maybe if this gave a creature flying in lifelink, like you can at least get in for some amount. But I have not been impressed by this card.
Yeah, this is the type of, aggression-based card that would be good for swinging specifically a damage race. This does not actually, add any power to your attacker. So it's good in that relatively narrow situation. The thing is, the last few years, that situation is very, very common. So I would have assumed this card would have been better, but in a slower format with huge creatures, it doesn't hold up. Also, reach everywhere doesn't help. Night Market is next. This is a land, and it ETB's tapped, and when it ETBs, you choose a color, and taps to add 1 mana of the chosen color, and you can cycle it for 3.
Yeah, this is just better than Evolving Wilds, right? It's It gives you the color that you want, and then in the late game, the cycling is very relevant because it just gives you something to do. The games go longer. So right now, I mean, so far the cards have been pretty weak that we've seen, but this would be my first pick.
Yeah, for sure. Next is Nimble Thopterus. This is the 3 and a blue 3/2 that makes a 1/1 Thopter when it ETBs. It's pretty good.
Yep. Yeah, just solid creature. Not among the best blue commons, but it's still just a card that you don't cut all that often. So it's fine. It's certainly better when you are drafting the blue-white or blue-black artifact deck, where having the Thopter, you get some extra bonuses out of that. But perfectly serviceable creature.
And that brings us to uncommon. So the first one's going to be that foil. It's Memory Guardian. This is the 4 and a blue 3/4 flyer. It's an artifact creature itself, and it has affinity for artifacts. I have not played with or against Memory Guardian just yet.
Yeah, you have to be the artifact deck, of course. Otherwise, this card is just not remotely playable, really. Like 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer is just not where you want to be, especially in a world of 4 mana 4/4 reach creatures at common.
No kidding. It does not stack up well. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have needed to be a 4/3 or something. But that being said, in an artifact deck, it's just, I feel like it's just fine though. Just a decent sized body. If you can play this for 3 mana, it can be pretty good. But you have to build around it. It's cool. It's a really cool card to search for with Transit Mage, right? Because it's a 5 mana artifact. So you can play this on turn 4 or at a discount. So if I'm an artifact deck, I'm pretty happy with it. But it's not. Even in an artifact deck, I wouldn't consider this. For example, I think Pactile Terror, the 3 and a black 3/4 common, enters a battlefield, drains your opponent for 1, and whenever an artifact comes in, you drain your opponent for 1. I think that's a better artifact card to play than this card. But this one isn't uncommon. It's flashy. It gives you somber Hoverguard vibes from Mirrodin, which was a 6 mana 3/2 flying creature for affinity. We live in a different world now, though. And like I said, I'm happy enough to play this in an artifact deck. It's probably like a C+ level card there, but it's just fine.
Yeah, to me, this is the type of card you want to pick up 7th, like in that deck.
Yep.
Like the thing is that it's not that great of a payoff, even if you're in that deck, and it matches up horribly with the format. Like Green and red both have, well, red's best common is a 4/5 with reach, and green's whatever second or third best common or whatever it is a 4/4 with reach. Like, good luck getting your Memory Guardian through. Next up is Adrenaline Jockey. This is the 2 and a red 3/3 Minotaur pilot. And it says, whenever a player casts a spell, if it's not their turn, this creature deals, it's a lot. It deals 4 damage to them. And whenever you activate an exhaust ability, this thing gets a +1/+1 counter. I've liked Adrenaline Jockey. It's okay.
You know what I don't like about this card? That first ability is a symmetrical effect.
It is.
It's any player. And usually things like this that we've seen in the past, it only really affects your opponents. It kind of like punishes your opponents for doing something like this. And so I've had my opponents play this, and then they had to cast a spell on my turn because I had a combat trick or something, and they just died. Right? Or they just took way too much damage. So that I don't even consider that mode an upside just because it's symmetrical. So then you're looking at kind of a 3-mana 3/3 with upside if you exhaust. And if you do exhaust, it does get bigger. I think this card, again, it kind of reminds me of, it's kind of like the Memory Guardian, where if you do draft the red-green exhaust deck, it's a fine card, but it's not game breaking. And it's certainly not something that I consider a signpost uncommon level card when it kind of reads that way. I feel like this just won't play out as well as you would expect. And it looks really, really good. And I feel like it's only kind of an average level card in the context of the format, but an average level performing red uncommon is well above the bar because a lot of the red cards are pretty bad in this format.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely don't get I mean, I've already had 2 different people kill themselves to the ones that I had on the board.
Yeah.
I have managed to somehow not do it to myself, but hopefully I can continue that trend. Next is Country Roads. This is a land that enters tapped unless you control a mount or vehicle. It taps to add white, and you can pay 1 and a white, tap it, and sack it to make a 1/1 pilot.
So this isn't the right colors for this type of land to be okay. Like if you're in white, you usually will have mounts and vehicles. And then this card gets a lot better just because you have something to saddle or crew your things. And also the fact that this comes into play untapped, right? That's a big thing. Like you have to balance how many tap lands you play in your deck. So for example, even if you're playing a 2-color deck and you have a Night Market and let's say a Gain land, and you only have like 2 mounts, you really don't want to be playing too many of these because just having too many tap lands can be a liability. Now, where I also like playing these roads is, if I have a deck with pothole moles in them, right? Then all of a sudden you have a land in your deck that you can sacrifice for a little bit of value in the late game. So they are performing a little bit better than I initially anticipated because of the speed of the format, but I don't want to overdo them, and I do not take them very highly.
Yeah, that's how I felt too. Although I have activated them every time, basically, I've had them. Next is Rise from the Wreck. This is 2 and a green for a sorcery. It says return up to 1 target creature card, 1 target mount card, up to 1 target vehicle card, and up to 1 target creature card with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah,
I don't know how this is like actually performed like numbers wise, but I've had people cast this against me numerous times, and they've gotten 2 things at least with it. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but compare that to like a black common that we've seen in the past, right? That's you get the 2 cards, and here you're not 100% to get the 2 cards. So there's a lot of variance in this card. I've had my opponent get 3 cards back, and usually you're going to win the game if you get 3 cards back. So there's upside there, but how often can you pull that off? I think this is kind of secretly a Golgari card. This is the type of card that you're going to be playing if you have a lot of other ways to self-mill. Let's say you have Pothole Moles, Dredger's Insights, Quag Feast, what have you. And then in that type of deck, if you do have a nice mix of vehicles and creatures and gibberish omnivores, if you can consistently get 2 cards back, this is playable, right? I'm still not saying that it's great, but if you have upside of getting up to 3, then this can get up to kind of that C+ level card. Granted, you build around it.
What's the Paul? We need to make sure we talk about the 9/7.
Oh, right.
I just put GGG2 on this sheet because I can't remember the name of it yet. But We got to talk about that guy.
You put it on the list. Put it on the list because I have things to say about that.
We got
card.
stuff to say about it. Next is Dredger's Insight. You just mentioned this one. This is the 1 and a green enchantment. Whenever one or more artifact and or creature cards leave your graveyard, you gain 1 life. Turns out that doesn't happen too often except for this first time. So it's kind of like just gain 1 life most of the time. But it says, when this enchantment enters mill 4 cards, you may put an artifact, creature, or land card from among the milled cards into your hand. And that does count for the gain in the life.
Yeah, so when you play this and you get a creature or vehicle back, you gain the life. This card is really, really strong in Golgari decks because, you're self-milling yourself. If you mill something gigantic, like a Thunderous Broodwagon or something, you just kind of leave it in the graveyard, and then you cast like a back on track or a Broodheart Engine to get it back, and you're kind of living the dream there. And if you are specifically with the Golgari deck, like, look, if you cast Rise from the Wreck or some other ways to get things back from your graveyard, you gain a life. Returning Deathless Pilot from the graveyard gains a life. So this actually gains you more life than you would expect. Mm-hmm. Granted, you are the Golgari deck, and there's actually a really cool combo with this card that exists. It's another uncommon in the set. It's Earth Rumbler, which is 4 and a green for a 7/6 Vigilance Trample vehicle, which says exile target artifact or creature from your graveyard, and this card automatically gets crewed. So with Dredger's Insight in play, if you have like 5 creatures in your graveyard, in a racing situation, you can just gain 5 life, which is really cool. And I've actually had that be the deciding factor in actually winning games. So, if this card can gain you 2 or 3 life and get you a card, that's really, really strong. So this is a really, really good engine card. And, honestly, because of the speed of the format and because this gains you the 1 life, if you have a deck that has a lot of powerful creatures in them, this is still a totally fine card to play in most of your green decks, I think, but it really shines in Golgari. In Golgari, it's very, very strong, but I don't mind playing this if I have good creature quality in my Simic decks, because I go get my good exhaust creature or whatever from the graveyard, get that back into my hand, and then that creature is going to get me value.
Yeah, it really is good in Golgari. It would seem borderline to me outside of it. Although I would assume, like, I actually would assume that most decks that you play it in, it would be, it might actually be impossible to miss. There's some decks because of vehicles and stuff that you don't have, for instance, and sorceries or whatever, right? Whatever are misses. But I mean, even if you have a few of those in your deck, the percentage goes to, 99
like I said,
or whatever.
Right. Like I said, I think in just like any non-Golgari green deck, it's just like an average level card. Yeah, it's just kind of, you put it in your deck and it's always going to be fine. It's never going to be terrible, right? But then in Golgari, it's like this can get to a B level card. Granted, you have the right setup for it, which means all the good Golgari uncommons.
Our rare, really nice. It's Otchik Emerald Radiant. This is the 3 black green 3/3, but when it enters, you get a 1/1 insect creature for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. And then whenever another insect you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Otchik, and this is critical, each opponent loses 1 life. I've had this card and also played against it. And the cool part is that since it does go directly into Golgari, it is a card that you can reanimate. Ideally, you do your self-mill stuff like you were talking about, Paul, with Pothole Moles and Dredger's Insights and stuff. And then you play it and you get 3 or 4 insects. And given that it is a problem, like when the insects die, they're hurting the opponent. So like if your opponent's low on life, they can just be lethal. And if they do die, then Otchik can just get absolutely huge. Otchik actually does command some removal, even though you'd think like, well, the damage is kind of already done. And then given that you're Golgari, you can bring it back. And all of a sudden, boom, there's more insects again. And it kind of becomes like a little bit of an engine for that deck.
Yeah, it is not hard in the Golgari decks to just play this on 6 and have it at least make you 3 tokens. Right. And I've had it make 4 tokens. And then oftentimes you play that and they're going, okay, well, I can handle the insects as long as I kill the Otchik. So they're going to kill the Otchik, which means you're still up 4 insects on the exchange. Mm-hmm. And then you return the Otchik and then it's just game over if they don't have a way to kill it, because you're just like, okay, at that point, you're going to be able to keep some insects back just to chump, right? And if that's the case, the Archetype just gets out of control. But you can also just attack with your insects. You don't care if your insects die. You just go attack you with 2 or 3 of my insects, and they're just like, okay, I block all of them. All right, take 3. I now have a 6/6 in play, right? Exactly. And you can just keep playing this game, whittle your opponents down to a pretty low life total, and then at that point, you're just Archetype is a 6/6 or a 7/7, which also demands to be traded by at least a migrating Ketrodon, if not more.
Right. I would windmill Archetype out of this pack. Yeah,
Archetype is the slam dunk pink here for sure.
Yeah, it's a bomb rare in what has been at least early going one of, if not the best archetypes. So let's do another crack a pack. That was fun. We got an Archetype, so we can't really go wrong. First card up is Tranquil Cove. So this is the gain land for blue-white.
Yeah, totally. All the gain lands are obviously completely playable. Blue-white is not one of the stronger color combinations. I would never want to pick a gain land, but obviously once you get into pack 2 or pack 3 and you're definitely in those colors, then you start considering the gain lands over, reasonable cards of that color combination.
That's right. Velo Heart Bike. This is an interesting one. This is the 2 and a green 4/2 vehicle with crew 2. And when it enters, you gain 2 life and it taps to add 1 mana of any color. This is a type of card that it seems like it actually has a little wiggle room in a format like this.
Yeah, no, I think this card is totally fine. It's fun. It's fun. Green is just so deep. This is not anywhere close to the top of what you want for green, what you want out of the green commons, but it's still totally serviceable. I feel like as the meta game continues to evolve, I wouldn't be surprised if this card gets better once everybody starts drafting all the green decks, and then you have to start branching out. Right now, everybody has busted Golgari and Simic decks, right?
Yeah.
But once everybody starts drafting green, then you're going to have to dig a little deeper, take cards like the bike, and then splash for cards in other colors. And, in this format, this is one of the best ways to splash a different color. So this with like a couple of night markets, and now you're talking, and you can splash, some broadside barrages or some rares. So it's fine. Certainly not something that you want to first pick. But if I play this, I am not sad to play this in my deck.
For sure. Burner Rocket. 1 in a red for a 3/1 flash. It's a vehicle that crews for 1. And when it ETBs, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and trample until end of turn.
Yeah, this in theory looks pretty interesting if a red aggro deck was pretty good. But generally, they're not. I have seen some really good Rakdos aggressive decks where you can maybe play some of these. But even then, if you want a combat trick, you want maximum overdrive instead. So this is just not something that I really value highly. And this is the type of card that if I play too many of these, I'd be pretty sad.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because that's another marker for the speed of the format and what's going on. Because this is a perfectly fine card. Like as a Magic card, it's quite good. But it doesn't seem to have much of a home. Next is an interesting one. I don't remember what we gave it, but it's Broadcast Rambler. That's the 4 and a white 5/4 vehicle with just crew 1. And when it ETBs, you get a pilot token with it. So it comes with pilot. We liked it, I think.
Yeah, no.
And it's been good.
I believe it makes a Thopter, no?
Is it a Thopter? You're right. It's a Thopter, not a pilot. My bad.
Which is better.
That is enough to crew it. But
it is enough to crew it. And that's the important thing here, because the issue with vehicles, of course, is the fear that you don't have any creatures to actually crew the vehicles. And this one, it kind of solves its own problem. So when you play this, it's not like it's just an empty creature on the board. You just have the 5/4. So your opponent, they have to answer the 1/1 to answer this card. So this has actually proven itself to be a really, really solid white common. In fact, it's actually the second best white common, in my opinion, in the set. And definitely overperformed relative to kind of what we kind of anticipated, because this is kind of like basically White's version of the Nimble Thopterist, right? It's like it costs 5 mana, it gives you the 5/4 and the Thopter, and 5/4 body is significantly better than a 3/2. So I do like this card, and I like the fact that especially in artifact decks, this produces 2 artifact permanents.
Yeah, it's a big
deal,
which
helps out a lot with a lot of the different synergies that you might be looking for.
For sure. Next is Broken Wings. This is the 2 and a green instant destroy an artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. I've seen a lot of these. People have been playing them. Kind of interesting because they're not amazing in like the green mirrors, though you can find targets with the destroy trigger artifact on a vehicle will pop up often enough to maybe get there. But against all the other colors, you actually do find targets, blue and white particularly have flyers that you can snipe with them. And then every deck has an artifact somewhere.
Yeah, if you ever play against blue white or blue black, this card is incredible, right? It's just straight 3 mana, kill anything. So whenever, especially if a lot of our viewers are playing at FNM and it's going to be best of 3, you ever see this on the wheel and you're green, you take them. You take as many as you can see, because this is a phenomenal sideboard card. But even in the context of this format, this card I think is good enough to play the first copy in almost all of your decks, especially if you are light on interaction, right? Just like good removal is hard to come by, of course. And so if you don't have one, I am perfectly happy playing the first copy of Broken Wings. I wouldn't play more because there are matchups you play against, Golgari, for example. You're going to run into instances where you just don't have that many targets and you're just like, please play the Broodwagon so I can kill it. But they still got value out of their Broodwagon anyways. So be careful with how many Broken Wings you play, but I think the first copy is pretty good.
Next is Guidelight Optimizer. This is the 1 and a blue 2/1 artifact creature that taps to add blue, but you can only spend it on artifact spells or to activate abilities.
Yeah, this is the type of card that I guess I'd be looking to play in my artifact decks. I don't like it as much as a way to as a mana creature in my exhaust decks, for example, because you can use this for that. But I would much rather have this be a way to ramp into a turn 3 Pactol Terror. Something along those lines. So if I'm playing an artifact deck, I would consider it, but not something that I take very highly. You often wheel these things, and even if you see a bunch of them, you don't want to play a ton either.
No, the best thing about it is that it's 2 mana and an artifact. Like
right.
That's the characteristics that you play that for. Next is Streaking Oil Gorger. This is the 4 and a black 3/3 flying haste, and it has Start Your Engines. If you get to max speed, it also has lifelink.
Yeah, so this is the type of creature that I would really like only if I can consistently find other ways to start my engines early, where by the time I cast this, I want to at least be on 3 speed, right? Like I cast this and I'm on 3 speed, I connect once, and then I have a lifelink flyer, which is pretty nice. But we did talk about previously, this is not the world of flyers. Like this is not the world where things are dominated by flyers, and this card just gets brickwalled by a lot of the good reach creatures that exist in the format. Red has 1, it's the best common for red. Green has 2, some of the better commons. So it doesn't fit very well. But of course, if you can find a way to connect with this, black is a color with, spin out, siphon fuel, and maximum overdrive. So if you pair this with that, it can be an okay top-end card to play in aggressive Start Your Engines decks.
Yeah, especially ones that can get that ball rolling early. Like if it's 4 when it hits, this card plays like a pretty powerful uncommon. Yep. And if it's not, it plays a lot weaker. Next is Ether Jacket. This is the 3 mana 2/1 flying artifact creature. It's a Thopter. It has vigilance as well, and you can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice this thing to destroy another target artifact at sorcery speed.
I think I'll be happy to basically never put this card in my deck ever. And so it just the stats are just not nearly good enough. Look, if you desperately need artifact destruction, maybe you can board this in if you just have nothing else. But the stats are just too underwhelming for this card to have any impact, in my opinion.
Gastel Raider is our first uncommon. This is the 2 and a black 2/1 with Start Your Engines. And when it enters, target opponent reveals their hand and you choose an instant or sorcery card from it. They discard that card. And then this has max speed. It just gets a nice little bump. It gets menace and +1/+1 if you do manage to get to max speed as well.
Yeah, I think this card is good, but I think people are also overvaluing this card. And what I mean by that is I've just had this card miss so many times.
I have too. Vehicles take a big hit. Yeah,
exactly. You play this card and your opponent just has like vehicles and enchantments and creatures in their hand, and this just whiffs. And right now, a lot of the vehicles are probably taking over some of the slots that would have been reserved for spells. And so for that reason, you will miss. Now, the upside is incredible. Like if you ever get a card off of this thing, it's great, right? 3 mana, 2/1 body, Start Your Engines, and you're up a card in the exchange. That is really nice. You will always play this card, right? You will never cut this from your deck, but I just want to temper expectations and don't get upset when you miss with this card because it will happen more often than you think.
That's right. It already has happened more. Plus the max speed bump is okay. It is not amazing. It's not like when it gets there, you're like, oh, I did it. Now this thing's just, it doesn't turn into a vampire Nighthawk or something. It's just okay. Next is Spell Pierce. This is the blue instant counter target non-creature spell, unless it's controller pays 2. I mean, is there room for this in the format, given that people are playing a bunch of vehicles and stuff, and you can kind of get a little bit of collateral damage on those with Spell Pierce?
Yeah, I mean, there's upside, but it's so minor. There's still just everybody just playing a bunch of creatures. Like I'd be happy. This is another card that I probably will just never play, at least in my main deck. It's just, I would much rather play Spectral Interference as a counterspell. This is just not something I'm interested in. If you think you can get your opponents and you, again, have it in your sideboard and they have some kind of really expensive spell that demands an answer and this is your only answer, you can maybe try to board it in. But outside of that, I would just never start this card.
Apocalypse Runner is 2 black-red for a 6/5 vehicle with crew 3. And it says target creature you control with power 2 or less tap it, and you can give target creature you control with power 2 or less lifelink and can't be blocked this turn. This is a weird card. I have played it.
I do not understand.
Yeah, it's very strange. It is really weird. You activate it a few times. A lot of times you'll see these cards, these, magic cards designed where like there's sort of a natural progression from kind of you do one thing and then it enables another thing. And this one just feels like 2 completely separate cards stapled together. The crew cost being 3 is a little rough. I mean, this is big. It's a 6/5 vehicle for 4 mana, but crew 3 means you're really committing to get this thing in there. Overall, I would say I'm unimpressed by the Apocalypse Runner. It seems like it doesn't line up with the ideals of what the deck is trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's one of the weaker signpost uncommons. You look at this card and you want to like it. There's a lot of words on it. It's got a huge body. But remember, because so many vehicles in this format have crew cost of 3, a lot of your creatures in the format also have power 3. So there's been plenty of instances where I play this card and I have like a 3/1 in play and it just doesn't do anything. Right. So and I feel like they had to make it power 2 or less, probably for balance reasons, because if you make 3 power things unblockable with lifelink, that's probably too strong.
Yeah.
So this card just lives in a really, really weird spot. Maybe they should have made the crew cost 2. Right. Maybe that would have made more sense. Right. You play this and you're like, all right, well, I make my small things unblockable. Okay, now my small thing can crew this still. But the fact that you can make your 2 power creature unblockable, but then your 2 power creature can't crew this, it's just a really weird dynamic. And oftentimes this ability just whiffs because your creatures are too big. So I just been underwhelmed with this card. And this is not the Rakdos card that I see and go, okay, Rakdos is open, I'm moving in, right? This is not that type of card.
It looks like that card, right? Like when it pops up on your screen, you're like, ooh, but then it doesn't really play out that way. Next is Rocky Roads. This is the red
road, red road.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's again, this is fine, but you're just not ever taking roads early.
Next and last is, or actually, sorry, second to last. First up is Ride's End. Oh, I should have, for some reason I saw that as an uncommon. Anyway, Ride's End is our foil / alternate slot, whatever. So it's 4 and a white instant, and it says exile target creature or vehicle, and it costs 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped permanent. It's been good.
Yeah. No, this card's good. This is one of White's only good commons, but it is a very, very good one. And they also made it so you can splash for this card. So it's certainly splashable as well. Exile also very relevant, especially when you play against the Golgari decks. I like this card a lot. And so far, it's probably my pick.
Yeah, this is a sweet spot for white common removal that isn't just Busto. Last one is our rare. It's Redshift Rocketeer Chief. This is the green-red 2/3 legendary goblin pilot with vigilance. This one is the one that taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is Redshift's power, but you can spend the mana only to activate abilities. And then it has exhaust itself for 10 red-green to put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield.
This card, I feel, looks way more exhausting. This card looks way more exciting than I think the way that it plays out.
Yeah.
2 mana, 2/3 vigilance. If this format was aggressive, this is a really good blocker. And I'm not saying this card is bad. You're always going to play it in your red-green exhaust decks, and it's a mana creature for the exhaust decks. But you need to have red and green on turn 2 to be able to play this. And I think this card is just decent, and I don't classify it as a bomb level card. I think a lot of people look at this card, see legendary, see 2-drop, see all the words on it, and they're going to probably talk themselves into thinking this is better than, I don't know, a stampeding Scurryfoot. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's just not.
It's just
so. Yeah. And it's a gold card, right? Like taking a multicolor card, pick one, means that you have just such a lower chance to be able to play this card. And this is certainly not powerful enough to consider splashing either. So for that reason, I don't think I would take this card out of this pack. I think the card is cool and exciting, but for me, Ride's End is probably the card I would take here.
Yeah, I look at Ride's End and Gastel Raider.
Yeah.
I would probably go with the Raider.
Those are the two options that I would consider as well. And Raider isn't a better color. So that's another thing, right? Like white isn't particularly strong. I think Ride's End is probably, it's close, but if you want to use the tiebreaker, black is a significantly stronger color than white. I would think taking the Raider is also totally fine.
Yeah. I think I would take the Raider just because it's black. If it's close there. Okay, so let's get into the discussion of the format. The first thing is the big headliner here is the speed of the format, right? This is always something that we pay close attention to, especially given that, modern design sensibilities, meaning the last 2.5 years, have led things to be faster and faster and faster. And we get a break here, at least early, admittedly, right? The format's only been out for less than a week, so we'll see where the dust ends up settling. But early indications, both anecdotally, just how the format feels, plus what we can see on 17 lands as far as format speed goes, both indicate that it's slower. Just as an indicator right now, it's sitting at about 9.1, 9.2 average number of turns to finish a game. And that puts it slower than basically all of the formats we've had for the past, say, year and a half or so. And by a significant stretch, as an example, like Bloomborough was 8.7. This one's pushing 9.2. Like that's a very, very big difference. LCI was 8.8, right? You can go down the line here and you'll see that this format is markedly slower than what we've had of late. So that's a headline. And I say, I mean, you can feel it when you play, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, even just for me, I make draft videos every day and I'm editing these videos. And when I'm comparing my videos to the ones in Foundations, for example, my videos are 20 minutes longer, 15 to 20 minutes longer. And that's a good indication of just the speed of the format as well, right? Where the games do stall out, the games do go longer. And so like, the numbers here definitely reflect my experience as well, because I have to spend more time now because I don't want my videos to all be 2 hours long. So I've been spending a little more time trying to trim where I can just to make it more manageable for people to watch. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Now, but there's another side of this coin. And this is maybe more important in some ways than the outright speed of the format, which is kind of more of a stylistic thing, but a bare numbers thing is the game win rate on the play. So, if you're not familiar with what that is, the broad strokes is somebody has to go first in Magic. That's how games work like this, turn-based games. Somebody has to go first. So the way that they solved the problem back in the day was random, flip a coin, roll a die, something like that. So it is what it is, and off you go. The problem that the designers face is that unless a set hits a certain, I would say even a little bit of a weird cadence, that is almost always going to advantage the player who goes first. Now, that being said, that's okay, right? It's random. It theoretically, if I go first, I will go first half the time and you will go first half the time over a long sample, and it's okay, right? The question becomes, how much are they benefited? Because if it's a little bit of a bump, let's say they have 51% game win rate on the play, that's what this is measuring, you can live with that, right? Because it's like, well, they're winning 1%. It's a 2% spread from if you lose the die roll to when you win. We can live with that. What can't you live with? Well, I don't know. I don't know how they see that type of thing. But I'll tell you, these sets of late have all been above 53%. Now, that's major. I mean, you know, if you've ever done any type of professional gambling or anything like that, you know, you'll understand that that's a very big spread. And meaning that, you know, if I played against, like, let's say I play against Paul. Paul's better at Magic than I am. If I get to win the die roll all the time, that's going to make a big difference on how things actually play out for us. Because if I get to grab a 53% and he has to try to overcome that every single time, that's going to be tough. And it can make the games feel a little bit hopeless if you don't win the die roll. And you really don't want that in a game like this. Now, this one is below 53. And I'm not saying that 53 is a magic number. It's just the number that the other sets happen to be above. Again, you know, sets like Bloomburrow and LCI and stuff are above that. But this one's right there. This is just a little bit below 53. So we're getting a slower format. But let's not get that twisted, Paul. That does not mean you get to take turns off.
Oh, absolutely. Like this is not Magic from 20 years ago. You still need to have a respectable mana base. The only thing with the speed of this format is you don't need to have, remember, we've had formats in the past where you need 10 2-drops in your deck. If you don't have 9 or 10, if you don't play a 2-drop in your deck, you're just dead. This format gives you a little bit more leeway, but that's not to say don't play any 2-drops. You still want to make sure you have 5 or 6 things to do on turn 2. That's just normal Magic, and you need to respect that. And if your opponent plays a turn 2 Gibrick Omnivore on the play and you have nothing on turn 2, you're probably still going to lose that game if they have any follow-up. And I've definitely been on the back foot too. My opponent still just curved. Like, your opponent can still curve out, and if you're on the draw and you curve out to match them, and they have a well-timed combat trick or a bounce off or whatever to tempo you out, you can still easily lose those games. So, you know, I actually performed an experiment here, Marshall. In one of my early drafts, I was like, you know, this format seems really slow. What if I just take all the slow cards? Mm-hmm. Just screw it. I don't care about my 2-drops. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take all the Thundering Broodwagons and Migrating Ketrodons that I see, and whatever 2-drops I have left over, we'll just see what happens. Okay. And it did not go as well for me as I thought, because my deck looked strong. I had a lot of powerful uncommons. When in doubt, I always just took the more expensive card. And I had what looked to be a very awesome Reanimator deck. And I ended up going 4-3. So the power was there. So you can still draft slow decks and do well. But all of my losses were my opponents just curving out and me just not having something to do early. So you should skew heavier. You should skew towards having mana sinks and doing more things in the late game. You absolutely should. And you need to make that adjustment to have success in this format. But still do not ignore, you know, at some point in pack 2, you're like, all right, like I need 2-drops.
Right.
Like there's a Migrating Ketrodon in the pack, but I need to take this Venom Sack Lagak. Like I need to take this 2-mana creature. I need to take this Engine Rat over I need to take this Engine Rat over Hazard of the Dunes, just because my curve is simply far too high and I need some early drops. Those are the considerations that you still need to make and respect to make sure that you just don't get run over. You know, and a way that I would say that you can view this, because you might look at this and think like, oh, so, you know, what's going on? Like, I need to be aggressive, or I need to do things, you know, in this sort of aggression versus not aggression spectrum. And that's not actually it. It's interesting because since these games are going significantly longer than many of these other formats, the thing you should actually look for is enabling or enacting your game plan early. That does not necessarily mean turning creatures sideways and killing your opponent in 5 turns, but it means if you're behind on setup, by the time the late game rolls around, we are getting to the late game now because of the speed of the format. The advantages that you will have built in the early game now come to pay off, right? Let's say you're playing the self-mill deck. You have managed to play a few cards at the 2 and 3 mana slot, you know, like we had in our Crack-a-Pack, or, you know, if you've got a Pothole Mole, you know, you go Dredger's Insight into Pothole Mole. That's not a particularly aggressive start. The first one didn't add any power and toughness, and the other one's just a 2/3. But you've milled yourself for, you know, 6 or 7 cards at that point.
right? Now, when you kind of turn the corner and boom, I can play my reanimation spell. I got targets, right? I did stuff that set me up for that. And now that's what ends up closing out the game. It's just happening a little bit later, but you didn't take those turns off. You were still advancing your game plan, even if it ends up not coming to fruition until later. So you can afford to do things sometimes that aren't necessarily, aggressive minded, but you can't afford to do nothing. So keep that in mind. If you lose the die roll, your opponent is going to have an advantage on setting up whatever their late game situation is over you. And therefore, you need to be always aware. I mean, that's where the glaring weaknesses in decks with bad curves show up, right? Is when you lose the die roll, right? And now you're just like so far behind. I mean, imagine if you have a clunky draw and you don't do anything on turn 1, 2, and 3, if you get to play a great 4-drop on the play, you might be able to come back. But if you're on the draw, there's just no way. Like you're way too far behind.
If they have just anything, right? Combat trick, removal spell, bounce spell, you're just done. If your first play is a Hazard of the Dunes on turn 4.
Right. So keep that in mind, but this is promising stuff and it gives us a bit more wiggle room to enact those game plans. And absolutely critically, as we transition into talking about the best colors and the best pairs, Paul, the headliner, there's 2 headliners for me, and one of them is green. We'll talk about that in a minute. But related to that are the top 2 archetypes right now. You foreshadowed this a little earlier in the show, Paul, but these are the 2 that struggle. These are the 2 that they haven't been able to make work. These are the 2 archetypes that I'm always complaining about because these are 2 of my absolute favorites because I think they're the most interesting, that add things that you don't see all the time to limited. And it's black, green, and blue, green. They're currently the top 2 archetypes.
Looks like they listen to you.
Yeah, I'm so happy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at those 2 archetypes specifically, it both of them just don't run out of things to do. And also the strategies that they employ work really well with the uncommon. So if you look at Golgari, right? We actually, what's funny is we looked at both of the Golgari uncommons. We're like, these are far too slow, probably not going to be good. They're actually awesome. Right. So we look at the Broodheart Engine and the Broodwagon. Yeah. Both of those cards in that strategy just work so well together. And there's just a ton of good uncommons that super work well with that strategy. And that late game is just so hard to beat because if you just cast a Back on Track on a Broodwagon, it's so hard to beat. For 5 mana, you get to kill something and you have a 6/5 menace creature also with reach. Just randomly has reach too. So it just they basically made a block constructed deck here where if you get to do the thing, like they made sure if you resurrect a Broodwagon, your opponent's not going to be able to just attack you back, right? Because it's got the reach. There's just no other way to make that work. So black green works really well there. You have really good removal as well in black, and then with blue green, you just don't run out of gas. Like that is the exhaust deck. And that is the deck that I feel you can really pull off with mostly commons because there's just a ton of good exhaust creatures that people still undervalue that I think are good. You talk about just even cards that don't look that great. Skystreak Engineer, Keen Buccaneer. Those are cards that we initially were like, oh, that's whatever, D+, like filler level cards. Well, guess what? They're both mana sinks. And in this format, that actually matters. And they both just end up performing much better than anticipated. Also, blue and green specifically is a color combination that historically hasn't had good interaction. That's one of its biggest weaknesses. Blue has some of the best removal spells in the format. Bounce Off is incredible in a format where people are tapping their creatures to crew their vehicles, or they're paying 7 mana to exhaust their Hazard of the Dunes. Being able to have a 1 mana way to just completely, eat up 10 mana worth of things that your opponents can do is huge. Additionally, Flood the Engine might be Blue's best common, and that's a card that historically hasn't performed very well because usually black has some kind of sacrifice sub-theme to it. But that's not the case in this format. There's nearly no sacrifice in black. So there's just no way to get completely punished when you cast Flood the Engine on the thing. And if that's the case, Flood the Engine, if effectively in most cases, is 2 and a blue, destroy target creature.
Right.
And that's been my experience in a lot of the case.
In fact, it's sometimes better than that, right? Because they can't reanimate it.
Right. And so you just do that. And so I take that card very, very highly, because knowing that if I draft the blue-green deck, I'm never going to run out of stuff to do. So I just need to make sure that I have my bases covered, and I play enough Flood the Engines and bounce effects just to kind of stay alive. And green has arguably the best removal spell in the format in Run Over, which is the ultimate bite down. If you have that, and if you ever cast this thing for 1 mana, it feels like you're cheating.
It does. It feels like you're getting away with something. Totally.
I had a game where I had no shot of winning. My opponent had a 5/6 Scrounging Skyray and like another 3/3 rare. And I had 2 runovers in my hand, and I had 3 forests and a swamp. I'm like, man, I am behind here. I top deck Venom Sack Lagak, right? Which is a 2-mana, 2/1 Death Touch creature, and it's a mount. So run over costs 1 mana. I played that thing, cast double run over, killed their 2 big creatures, and I completely stabilized. It was literally for 4 mana. I put a Death Touch creature in play and just killed 2 of my opponent's creatures and came right back into it. So blue and green has among the best interaction in the format and the best late game. And then for black green, the uncommons are amazing. Also, blue-green's uncommons are amazing. They have some of the best signpost uncommons in the set as well. So works really, really well. No surprise that they're the 2 best archetypes. They're the 2 archetypes that I've also drafted the most for the time being. And there's a pretty big drop-off. When you go from blue-green to the next best archetype, which is red-green, it's roughly about 2% difference. That's pretty big. But one other thing that I wanted to mention, because we were talking about green in general, the top 4 winningest archetypes in the format, Marshall, all green.
That's incredible.
Insane. That's insane.
So green's running the tables right now.
Currently it is. I'm sure there's going to be some corrections here. We're still very early, but green is just extremely deep. The creatures are unreasonably costed. You know, we complain about how, hey, green, you just can't make a 5-mana 5/5 trample and have us believe that that's going to be a good green common. So they really listened to us, and they made some amazing, like the fact that just the creatures, Stampeding Scurryfoot, Hazard of the Dunes, Migrating Ketrodon, all are just ridiculous outliers in terms of rate. And then you have Pothole Mole that you can toss in the mix, which is also just a really good card. Insane in Golgari, but a card that's awesome in all decks, because this format's all about making sure you have mana sinks, and playing a 3-mana 2/3 that gets you a land 80% of the time is still good enough to play, because if you get that land, that's going to be amazing for you to just exhaust all your other cards.
Man, I've been really impressed. It's really interesting to see how green's played out, because if you just take the cards individually, you'll kind of have the conclusion of, well, if the format is slow, then this card's really good. Right. And it's just like, if you check that box, like cards like, Scurryfoot and stuff just go. I mean, we were talking earlier about like reverse engineering card designs. Like, what's up with the +1/+1 counter on the Scurryfoot? Right. Like that was not necessary at all. Right. No, just spitting out a 3/3 for 4 mana would have been totally fine. Yet they deigned to say, you know what? Let's bump this a little bit. Let's give it a little something extra. It's like, wow, like this card's already really good.
Oh, okay. I've already made this comparison in my videos, but Mild-Mannered Librarian, right? Green for a 1/1. For 4 mana, you put 2 counters on it and you draw a card. That was one of the better green uncommons in the set. If Stampeding Scurryfoot was an uncommon, would you be surprised? No. You're like, oh, that's a really good creature. Yeah. I get why this is an uncommon.
Especially at the 1-drop. Yeah.
Yeah, at 1-drop, like that's the thing. Whenever there's a Stampeding Scurryfoot in play on turn 3 and you're holding a spin out, you're like, man, I feel like I need to spin this out because then they're going to get a 3/3 and a 2/2 out of the deal, right? Like the fact that anybody who has a removal spell that costs more than the Scurryfoot feels like they have to kill the Scurryfoot is a sign by itself. Like you just play this on turn 1. Yeah, you play this on turn 1 and it's just like, well, it's if they use a premium removal spell, sure. I spent 1 mana on it. I got more mana out of the deal. And if they don't, well, I got 5 power and 5 toughness out of the deal.
Right. And this is like maybe the best version of that. Because remember, like we've been putting that thing on that Marshall scale, right? Like if I play this and my opponent uses removal on it, how do I feel? Right. And, generally speaking, that threshold leads towards cheaper creatures because they're going to be using more expensive removal in these exchanges. And it leads away from more expensive creatures. If your creature costs 5 mana and it doesn't pass that test, you are in big trouble, right? Like that is very difficult to overcome. This creature costs 1, and you don't have to invest the 4 mana to encourage them to use their 3 mana, 2 mana, 4 mana removal spell on the thing. That's insane. That's just crazy when people are just voluntarily ripping up hard removal on your 1-drop that you just spent the 1 mana on. Like there's nothing else. You haven't invested anything into this card, and they're just handing tempo losses to you, yet they have to. If they don't, then they just fall behind on board.
Yeah, and remember, you cannot blow your opponents out with a removal spell here. If you activate the exhaust ability on this, you're like, aha, I'm going to kill it in response. They still get the 3/3. So
totally. Just,
if you're playing at your local store, just don't think that actually works. So there's just no downside to this card. It's incredible. I had a deck. I had 4 or 5 copies of this. I was very happy with all 5 copies.
Yeah, you just
not to mention, I mean, just by itself, it's good. But then imagine like you pair this with exhaust payoff cards.
Exactly.
Then you just go nuts, right? You have a Ranger's Ether Hive in play, a Ranger's Refueler, or my favorite combination, Elvish Refueler.
Yes.
Right? When you have Elvish
more
Refueler
elephants.
on play, more elephants. Like, what do you do? When they have that in play, I'm just like, oh, well, I guess I lose this game. Like,
yeah, and that's
removal.
another perfect example of what we were talking about with the speed of the format thing. Like if you play Scurryfoot on turn 1, you are enabling the future, right? Not just of activating it, but if you have any of those payoffs in between, now you've got the Scurryfoot on the table and you can start doing the mid to late game things that at least so far in this format have proven to actually garner victory, right? Which mean you're doing big, powerful, synergistic, sometimes expensive things to push you over the top. It's not all about efficiency in the late game. The other thing we have to point out here, Paul, coming into a format, we've been trained. First place to look, not really a fan of it, but I usually look at red-white. How's red-white doing? It's usually the most straightforward archetype out of all of them. Usually blue-green and black-green are the weirdest, or the ones that you gotta kind of try out a few times before you really understand, how to play those decks, if they work, if it's worth it. And red-white's usually just like, here's a strategy. You can figure it out pretty quickly. How is it doing so far?
It is dead last.
Dead last.
It is dead last. Currently at 52.5%. It is 6% worse than the top archetypes, which is baffling to me. This is a format that's got speed. Theoretically, you want to be aggressive, but I think Wizards was very mindful that they didn't want to make a format that was all about 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, max speed kill you. So I feel like they really held back.
They nerfed
on
it a bit,
the strength of the red-white cards, but never has Boros needed trained Airings more than they need in this format. Because right now, when you look at a 2-mana Boros creature, they're all just bad.
They're bad.
And if you look at the combat tricks, they're also not good. I mean, you look at Light Shield Parry. We've just had better versions of that card for every set that we've seen. And, we look at Maximum Velocity being the best combat trick in the set. I feel like Boros needed, Take Up the Shield, something of that level to really have it stand up to some of just the monstrous creatures that the Boros decks run into. And I just found that, we talk about the Scurryfoot. If I'm playing a red-white aggro deck, I go 2-drop, 3-drop, and then they go Scurryfoot go on turn 4. I just don't have good attacks.
Right.
They're going to make a 3/3 and they have a 2/2. And so just, my very first early access draft, I tried drafting Boros. I'm like, well, I'm going to listen to what I said. We did this, 2 weeks ago. I was like, I'm going to draft Boros to start out with, because if, this set seems like Boros is going to be well supported. And I went 1-3 immediately. And I was like, what, did I just draft this incorrectly? But then I was thinking, man, like End Rider Catalyzer, Burner Rocket, I just Gilded Goda. I'm like, all these cards just feel sucky. Like they feel like they're just bad.
Yeah, they
I just
do.
don't like these Brightfield Glider. they just felt really, really underwhelming. And that's just how it's played out. And Boros is just, I never drafted Boros again since. And every time somebody plays a Boros deck, I just play my green creatures and they just can't do anything. That's been my experience.
Those cards feel bad and it feels so good. Yeah, I had a funny experience because, I write the draft preview article ahead of the Pro Tour for Wizards, but we have a really tight timeline. The set came out last Tuesday and we're playing in the Pro Tour on Friday morning. Like players are drafting Friday morning. Like it's like 10 days, from when the set went officially live on Arena. I know the pre-release came out before, but you can't draft it though. So like this is the first time you could actually like draft and, multiple times, you know what I mean? Like where you can actually get reps in 10 days. So for me, I'm like, okay, it came out Tuesday. I wrote the article Tuesday, but I had to submit it for Wednesday, to the editors and stuff over there. So I had to take a different approach because normally I would do what we're doing now, right? Where I'd have like some data, something to work with to try to give like a lay of the land for the format, but I just didn't have access to that. So my first 3 drafts were black-green trophy, ran it back, black-green trophy, and then red-white 2 wins. And so I'm like, sample size of 3, let's do it. So I wrote up how I tried red, white and didn't really like it. And then just said black, green's awesome. But the thing is, I actually put in the article that like I was taking a shot here and that like, forgive me if I'm wrong. Anyway, yeah, but this is all I have to say is it really does. It is a welcome change. Like, I'm not the type of person that never wants these red, white or these base aggressive decks to be good. I do like variety, but it's felt like we've lacked variety, and seeing black, green and blue, green at the top just makes my heart sing. I just think that's awesome. A couple more things to talk about. Vehicles. How have they been playing out in this set? And more specifically, like, do you have a limit in your head when you're playing, Paul, about like how many you want to play or what types, or how are you approaching vehicles in the set as far as, trying to get those dubs? Yeah,
honestly, I've already drafted this set, I think 30, 35 times at this point. And not too many times have I run into the issue of, oh my gosh, I have too many vehicles. Okay. I think one of my first drafts, I had like 3 Rangers Ether Hives and I was like, okay, I'm getting pretty heavy. But the thing is, I'm also pretty picky with the types of vehicles that I like to play. In general, I don't really want to play vehicles that's just power and toughness. Okay. So for example, Air Response Unit, which is a 2 and a white for a 3/3 flying vigilance vehicle with crew 1. I'm just almost never putting that card in my deck. It's just not even that much better than a creature at that mana. And so I just don't want to do that. But for a lot of the utility ones, I think the Wizards actually did a really good job of helping you decide or giving you kind of the out of either it producing a token like the Broadcast Rambler or Broadside Rambler, where it can crew itself, or giving it cycling. We have Ironclad, the red vehicle for 4 mana, it cycles for 1 red. The Broodwagon cycles for 2 mana. So they've also had some of that. And then also we've had some uncommon vehicles that just turn themselves into creatures, right? The Rangers Refueler, the 1 in a blue 3/3 vehicle, one of the best exhaust payoffs, by the way. That card just turns into a 4/4. I don't even know why it gets a counter, but it turns itself into a 4/4 creature that draws you a card. And then the red and green one also turns into a creature. So I've almost never run into that. But I would say that if you play I would say, I wouldn't count those actually, but I would say maybe around 5, like 4 or 5. And the thing is, since I'm picky about the vehicles I play, you better believe those 4 or 5 vehicles that are in my deck are all kind of premium quality. We're talking about Lumbering World Wagon, right? I'm talking about like I'm talking about really good vehicles.
Nice,
rare, uncommon. I'm almost never ever putting a common, like I will never put a Spot Cycle Scouter or very rarely put a Air Response Unit in my deck. Yeah. So I have just not run into that issue that much. Yeah.
So think about that when you're building your decks, because vehicles, they do represent an interesting design space, right? Where they kind of are like half a creature, right? They're a creature some of the time, and that can be interesting. But I found the same thing. I need the vehicle to do something when it ETBs. Like I kind of want the vehicle part to be a bonus to whatever it's doing, rather than the vehicle being the thing. Any of the vehicles that are trying to be the thing I shy away from majorly because it makes you play more creatures. Like you have to be even more all in just to make those things into actual creatures sometimes. And that's not usually where you want to go. Where, Thundering Broodwagon, right? It has cycling, so you can bail on it. You can also reanimate it. If you do just cast it, it has a very powerful ETB ability. And on top of it, when you do crew it up, it's monster. It's a 6/5 menace reach. Like it is huge. Like it's actually worth dumping a bunch of creatures into. So just keep that in mind. I think that sometimes since vehicles have a casting cost and power and toughness, our brain can kind of go, well, close enough to a creature, you just throw it in there. But it's really not. They're really, really not. They need to be working overtime for you.
My approach for vehicles is I just don't treat them as creatures most of the time.
That's a good way to do it.
I just kind of treat them as spells. So if you're going into pack 3 and you have 9 creatures and 5 vehicles, you better pick up like 4 creatures at least, 5 creatures for your deck, just to make sure that you fulfill the appropriate number of creatures that most decks want. And then that also is going to help you crew those vehicles. So just to take it with that approach, and I think it's going to help you kind of balance if you have a close pick between a solid vehicle and a solid creature, right, and your vehicle count's already pretty high and your creature count's low, use that as a tiebreaker. Take the creature.
Definitely. Okay, a couple of things to talk about. We're going to talk about individual cards, but we had a couple of big picture points. So one of them is, set review wise, right? Like we have been under the assumption that these sets are going to be pressure early, assertive, not necessarily aggressive, but definitely fast and that type of thing. When we come into the set review before we've actually played with the card. Now we've got our hands on a set here that is not fast. Again, that doesn't mean that you get to do nothing, but it is not aggressive. This is not an aggressive format. A lot of the wins and stuff come down to your mid to late game and what kind of synergies or mana sinks you can put together for that. So with that in mind, many of the cards in the set that, like Paul, we would describe them as like slow cards, right? They're actually a lot better than we would give them credit for. We gave them credit for, I mean.
Yeah, no, completely. I think we thought this format was going to be fast. And I think in a lot of instances where we look at a card and we go, oh, yeah, I mean, you can maybe play one copy of this card, but you kind of have to build around it just because it's far too slow. Mm-hmm. Well, that's just not the case. Those cards are all performing much higher than anticipated. So anytime we gave something a grade, I think at the very minimum for those quote unquote slow cards, not bad cards, slow cards, bump it up like 2/3 of a letter grade, maybe even a full letter grade in a lot of instances, because that's how they've been playing out. Good example of this is something like Ether Siphon, right? 1 blue for an artifact, enter the battlefield, start your engines, 2 tap, draw a card. We just thought you just can't do that in Modern Magic. Well, guess what? We've been proven wrong because that card actually has a reasonable win rate. It's still something that you need to build around. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a card that you slam dunk into every deck. But if you build in a deck that can survive, let's say you have a bunch of Death Touch creatures and some defensively slanted cards. I have been decked by this card. They got to maximum speed and they milled me out and they drew a bunch of cards off of this thing. So those types of cards all got better because they're mana sinks and they're good in kind of late game board stall situations.
Yeah, so keep that in mind when you look at those cards, particularly if you're going off of the set review, that you should be bumping up those cards 2/3 of a grade or something in that range. It's a significant amount. It's not a rounding error. It's like, no, this could take it from, from a D to the C range. It could take it from a C to the B range, like a card that you would play most of the time to one that you really want, or a card that you'd rather not play to one that, no, you actually want this card in your deck. It's a big difference. The other thing is talking about the speed of the format and looking at the cards kind of bigger picture. I just did a couple of searches and, the 2 things that we've mentioned so far that seem to have had at least some impact on the speed are that aren't related to the red-white cards or those type of cards actually being a little worse, is that both Reach and Death Touch are showing up quite a bit. We have 8 Reach creatures in the set and 6 Death Touch creatures, plus Maximum Overdrive is the best combat trick in the set as well that grants Death Touch. So, that's a lot of slowing things down, right? And these are tacked onto cards that are already pretty decent. Like it's not like these cards exist just to have Reach. It's like a card you may play and then it gets Reach as well. And then the cheap Death Touch creatures, the Rat and the Lagak, those really do enable those bite spells to be just straight up removal spells. So these are things to keep in mind as well. And it's just reasons why there's many, but some of the reasons why we see this format having a harder time for the small creature decks. Okay, let's talk about some individual cards before we head out for the day here, Paul. First up, Crash and Burn versus... This is something I never thought I would have to put on any type of list or whatever comparison, is Lightning Strike. These cards... It's weird. They actually they compare unfavorably, but not in the way you'd think. By the way, Crash and Burn is the 3 and a red instant destroy a vehicle, or it does 6 damage to a creature or planeswalker.
Yeah, and of course, Lightning Strike going in, we thought full stop, this might just be the best common in the set. Mm-hmm. But that's not how this format is playing out, because the aggressive decks are just not performing at a high level. What's taking over the games are those monstrous green creatures, right? We're talking about some of the or creatures that actually just have more than 3 toughness, right? Some of the iconic cards that are taking over these games in this format are cards like, Migrating Ketrodon, Hazard of the Dunes, Packdoll Terror, Thunderhead Gunner. All these creatures just don't die to Lightning Strike. And those are the cards that are taking over these games. So, Lightning Strike is still a good card. Don't get me wrong. It's like, I'm going to play all the Lightning Strikes that I draft. But I feel like even the discussion between Crash and Burn and Lightning Strike is closer than you would expect. Now, first pick, first pack, I'm still probably taking the Lightning Strike, right? You're just going to get Crash and Burns kind of later. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like in terms of what they actually bring to the table, Crash and Burn is really, really important, especially if you're a red deck. You need a way to kill the big things, right? And if you're red, and let's say you're red-green, you don't have the spin outs, you don't have Flood the Engine, you don't have the Ride's End, you don't have the hard removal spell. Crash and Burn is your hard removal spell. So don't take it for granted, and you really shouldn't be putting that card in your sideboard. If you're a red deck, you need to be playing the Crash and Burns, because you have to deal with a lot of those really problematic commons that all have more than 3 toughness.
That's right, and it is a good answer at instant speed for that. Next is a funny one. It's Gallant Strike. This is the 1 and a white instant at uncommon. Destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater, and it has cycling too. When we read this and when you look at a card like this, you're like, well, this is a really nice design, right? Like, there's some matchups where you don't have the target, so you can just cycle it away. But here, like, I'm not cycling away my Gallant Strike unless I'm playing like red white or something, yeah. Because otherwise, like, if they're touching green, if they have a vehicle, like, most of the vehicles are bigger than the average creature because they require the extra investment of crew, and Gallant Strike's going to find targets basically every game.
Yeah, this is just the same thought process behind why Crash and Burn is so good, except this costs 2 mana, and you're just going to get something most of the time here. If your opponent's playing anything green, or just like I said, the best common creature in almost every color is just a large creature. Yes. And so this just answers all of those cards.
Yeah. This next one, Paul, this is like the greatest news I've ever, I didn't know this until Paul and I were chatting in the pre-show. And by the way, we do record the pre-show and we actually stream it live, and the recording of the show live for patrons of any level. So if you're interested in that, and you can watch it after, like, a lot of people, it's hard to be here right when we're recording, but it does go up as a post on Patreon that you can watch after, and you get to see the nonsense with producer Jeff and me and Paul. And when Luis is here, Luis, just joking around and stuff pre and post show. But anyway, we were talking about this card. And I'm so happy, Paul, because this is this is what I loved. Ether Siphon. This is the 1 blue artifact at uncommon. It has Start Your Engines, and then it has 2 tap draw a card. I mean, just abysmally slow, right? Just, you're doing nothing, just peak dirtling. It also has max speed. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. So it actually gives you a built-in win condition to go with your card draw engine. A lot to love here. But I mean, come on, we can't ever seriously look at these cards in Modern Era Limited and think like, yeah, I'm going to do that. But apparently now we can. Paul,
yeah, I think this is I think this is a legitimate finisher, especially in kind of the the Dimir artifact decks, where you have because specifically Dimir, I like it. I like this more in Dimir than the Azorius artifact decks, because in Dimir you have Pact All Terror, right? That's one of the best commons in that color combination, might be the best common, and that just lets you get to maximum speed just by playing out your artifacts. And then you also have the Wreckage Wickerfolk, which is a 2-mana like we talk about how flying is not great. Well, this is the best flying creature probably at common. This is a 2-mana 1/3 artifact creature. When it enters a battlefield, surveil 2. So you just get a lot of bang for your buck with this card. It's an artifact creature. It's a 2-mana flyer. If you're trying to get to maximum speed, this is a great way to do so. And it smooths out your draws. So it just gives you a lot for 2 mana. And so when you're blue-black specifically, you just have this way to kind of get to maximum speed while drawing cards and kind of holding the fort with all your little creatures. And then in the late game, I have been milled by this card many times. My opponent plays this, draws some cards, pings me a couple times with Pact All Terror. All of a sudden, they're at max speed. And then remember, this also triggers off of any card draw spell. So if they play a Hull Drifter or anything else, they draw a bunch of cards, that also mills you for a bunch.
Also, your draw step?
Your draw step gets you. You cycle a card, that gets you. So yeah, this card has been surprisingly good. I think you do need to build around it a little bit. I like it a little bit less in the blue-green decks, just because the blue-green decks have a ton of ways to spend your mana anyways, right? You have all these exhaust cards, so you don't need this necessarily as a mana sink. But if you're blue-black or blue-white or any other blue color that's not specifically some kind of exhaust color combination, I think this card actually is far, far better than we initially gave it. I think we gave it like a D or something. Yeah. And it's playing out like at a C+ level. And
I felt like, I mean, when we gave it that, I thought it was more like a charitable D.
Right.
You know, because I just thought like, this is just such a trap to dump 5 mana to get a card back. And, you know, and it seemed to not work well with max speed, right? It's like, well, this is a card that's just having me sit back and pay mana to draw cards. Like, at what point am I attacking my opponent here? Yeah. But thank God it works. And by the way, same exact feelings about this next one, River Churn Monument. This is the Millstone, the 1 in a blue artifact at rare. Pay 1, tap in any number of target players, each mill 2 cards. And then it has Exhaust, 2 blue, tap it, any number of target players, each mills cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. But of course, you can only do that the one time. But we outlined it. Like we said, well, this could be a win condition. It's just that, like, even if I only have to get halfway milling through your deck, this is still a card that just does nothing that whole time and eats up mana. And that felt like too big of a cost. I think we actually gave River Churn Monument an F. I mean, these type of cards have performed poorly even in medium speed formats. This one is, medium trending towards slow. Are you telling me I can take and play this card?
Okay, River Churn Monument is even better than Ether Siphon in terms of it. Okay, it's at a 59% games in hand win rate. So we're talking about a B-level card here for a millstone. This might be one of the best millstones we've ever seen.
I'm so happy.
Right? And I also have lost to this card a ton, where my opponent plays this. If like oftentimes we talk about this, you'll get to kind of these weird board stalemate situations where one person's, whatever, who cares if I'm exhausting a thing and putting some counters on my creatures? Like, I'm still getting some damage in, but not a ton. But then if they have this thing in play, and the thing that really puts this card over the top is the exhaust ability. Like, if you play against a Golgari deck, you could kill your opponent in like 2 turns. Like, they're already going to do half the work for you. They're playing their pothole moles. They already are going to have like 10 to 12 cards in their graveyard. Then you just tap this a couple of times and then you mill them for 16. Yeah. And then it's just over. And it's over. And so, and that's the thing. If this card didn't have that exhaust ability, I'd still think this card was bad. But that exhaust ability really puts it over the top, because it only takes maybe, you play this and then you activate this like, 4 times, and then it's a legitimate way to just win the game. You just exhaust and you just win the game. People are playing, taking card draw spells. People are playing self-mill cards. So unless you're playing against like a Boros deck, which is not even very good, there's just a ton of matchups where this card is actually excellent. Just make sure you build around it. Make sure you play Engine Rats. Make sure you play, maybe you even play the Coraline 08 wall. Like, you just want to kind of build this very, very defensive deck so you don't get run over. And then you just kind of lean back, play the River Churn Monument, and you just mill them out.
Totally. I'm in. So in. This next one makes more sense. This is one that we were a little bit on the fence about, but decided wasn't probably very good. But if you had told me just a couple of things about the format, I would have easily come around on, which is March of the World Ooze. This is the 3 triple green mythic enchantment. And it says creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you get a 3/3 elephant, but that's really a 6/6 ooze. But yeah, this one was like kind of on the border, but on a slow format where green is really good, March of the World Ooze looks a lot better.
Yeah, in this format, anything that just kind of breaks open a stalemate is going to perform better than other things, right? So this is, Overrun, I think, would be good in this format, right? Where you just, both sides are just playing a bunch of things, you're scurry footing, you're playing some things, and you just overrun, you win the game. And this is basically just an overrun variant. And it's nice that this effect is permanent too. So you just kind of have this, you just slam it, all your 2/2s, 3/3s, whatever. You just end up with the much, much bigger board, and you just attack, and then you just kind of take over the game. And turns out the format is slow enough where you can just kind of get to this, and the power and toughness bonus that you get actually matters.
And it does completely lock them out of casting spells on your turn effectively. I mean, it would be a weird situation where they could.
Right.
Dude, we got to talk about migrating Ketradon.
Yeah, this card it just gives you everything.
It does.
Right? Because, I think part of, we gave this a bad grade, but I think my mistake was I was comparing this to the creature in Foundations, which was a 6-mana 4/4 that enters a battlefield, and you can either put 2 counters on it or gain 4 life. This one has the 2+1/+1 counters on it, gains you the 4 life, has reach, and also has cycling. Yeah. So it's just on rate, it just gives you everything that you want. It completely stabilizes you, but then also in the early game, you can cycle it away. And then also you can, this is a common creature that you're happy reanimating too.
Exactly. This is your go-to common reanimation target.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great. And so there's just, I'm happy playing my first 2 copies of Migrating Ketradon basically in every deck. And honestly, 3 is probably fine as well. This card has just performed really, really well. Now, because it's 6 mana and green is so deep, I still don't take this as highly as some of the other green premium cards. But if you just look at this card sheerly on kind of win rate, it is right up there. It rivals the Scurryfoot, the Run Over, Hazard of the Dunes. It's right up there. And that's really surprising out of a 6 mana creature.
Definitely. Next one's interesting. I never played with it, and I've played against it a couple times, and I kind of felt the pressure of it. I was like, okay, I get it. It's Thunderhead Gunner, which is, I guess, the best red common right now.
Yeah, this one blew my mind.
Yeah,
normally,
4 and a red, 4/5 reach, and you can discard a card to draw a card, but only a sorcery speed and only once each turn.
Yeah, so I did a poll. On my channel where I was like, what do you guys think the best red common was? Mm-hmm. And I put Lightning Strike, Crash and Burn, Burner Rocket, right? I just put, End Rider Cadillac. I put this wasn't even on the list. I didn't even put it on the list.
That's crazy. That's
now
awesome.
Now in the comments, people are like, Paul, you are so wrong. What were you thinking? It's obviously the Gunner. Yeah. Like, I knew the Gunner was going to be, I thought it was going to be Lightning Strike by a landslide.
Definitely.
Right? And somehow this Gunner is now performing among all players on 17 lands, including the top players. This is performing as the best common, which is nuts.
It's
It's a 5-mana 4/5 reach creature, but it is so important to always have something to do. And so this card, especially if you're a blue-red deck and you care about the cycling, this card matters. This is one of the best things at common to give you that continuous way to cycle through your deck. It's huge. It's a 4/5 body with reach. It basically blocks all of the flyers. And then also you as a red player, it makes sure that you just never run out of gas. So this is a card that if you are playing any red deck, you're just happy playing up to 2 copies of this card. And if you're more of a mid-range deck, maybe even 3. This card has completely overperformed, and I was very, very wrong about this card. It makes sense why it's performing well because the format's slower, and it just gives you that constant gas. But this is still a card that right now, you join a draft, you hop into an arena draft right now, you're still going to see this card 7th, 8th pick.
Yeah.
And it is performing as Red's best common.
It is, which is wild. I can't believe it. We talked about Flood the Engine, right?
Yep.
The extra thing on that of taking away its abilities, man, that came up like multiple times already.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, dude, you already tapped it and took it out like permanently, more or less, but then static abilities go away too. It really is, very much a hard removal spell in this format, or at least it feels that way. And our last card to talk about, Paul, Tarion World Tyrant, 2 GGG97, no text.
Oh man, I'm so glad.
In a world, where everybody's playing 4/4s and 6/6s and 4/5s, Tarion stomps on all of them. And it's good to be just king. The biggest thing you can do. And it turns out in this format, green is amazing. So the triple green mana cost is something you're more willing to accept. The few but significant, creatures with no abilities thing does come up. I don't remember, the 2/4, the giant spider that searches this guy up is a gnarly combo. This is a very real Magic card to get out of your library, for free, if as it were, or to buy back. And size, it is huge, and it's bigger than the other green creatures, and that's what really matters. This 7 toughness is kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, and this is the poster boy. This is the literal example of how important sizing is how important sizing is in all formats, right? Mm-hmm. If this is a lightning strike format, 4 toughness is important. If this is a format where migrating Ketrodon is the biggest, baddest creature on the battlefield, 9/7 is 7 toughness is absolutely huge.
Critical.
Think about it. And if you look at even the removal spells, the Siphon, Siphon Fuel, -6/-6, Crash and Burn, 6 damage.
Yes.
2 of the removal spells that were kind of designed to kill everything in the format doesn't actually get this off the battlefield. So all of a sudden, blue probably deals with this the best because you can bounce it off or trip it up or flood its engines.
Right.
But if you look at a lot of the other colors, it is really hard to actually get this off the battlefield. So 9/7 is a huge, huge game. I'm not saying this card is a bomb, but we, I think, had it kind of in the D level ish card. And this is more like a C plus level card. And if you have a Fang Druid Summoner, I am taking this over most of the green common creatures. Because Fang Druid Summoner into this is a legitimate win condition, and it's really, really strong. And one thing I learned about the Summoner too is I thought it only got things out of your library. Yeah. It gets things out of your graveyard.
It graveyards too. Yeah.
And I was just like, what? The first time I played it, the graveyard function showed up. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, I have a Tarion in my graveyard. I'm going to go get that out of my graveyard. That's going to be great. So
yeah, the only thing that this card doesn't want to see are the little Death Touchers. Those are the rat is really annoying for Tarion.
Yes, like Engine Rat and Venom Sac Lagak have definitely, especially the rat, they have gone up in value just because green is the best color in the format and it's defined by its gigantic creatures. Having a cheap thing that basically demands a removal spell. Otherwise, you can't attack with the Ketrodon.
That's right.
Right? Like you have a Ketrodon and a Hazard of the Dunes in play, and I go Engine Rat into Lagak. You're just like, oh gosh, I have to use a premium removal spell on these creatures. So these Death Touch and there's also not a lot of ways to punish people for playing a 1 toughness creature. In other formats, there are. Remember in what is it, Wilds of Eldraine, Flick a Coin was a card. Imagine playing a 1/1 Death Touch creature in a world with Flick a Coin as a common. That's not the case here. Basically, your opponents are going to have to at least use a Grim Bauble to kill this. And, Grim Bauble is a premium card. But outside of that, I've had to use Spin Out to kill a Death Touch creature so I can attack with my 6/6. It doesn't feel great, but it feels pretty great attacking with a 6/6 and not having to worry about a stupid Death Touch creature. Additionally, the rise in the strength or value of these Death Touch creatures is, we're talking different levels here, metagame here. Death Touch creatures are now better because the green cards are good, right? Then you go back to Howler's Heavy, or what is it, the Howler, the 3/4 creature that cycles. Yeah, that card gets better because that is also a nice way to deal with these Death Touch creatures. When you're drafting a blue-green deck with a bunch of big creatures, you have this way to basically say, kill target Death Touch creature, draw a card, right? And that combat trick ends up actually overperforming in this format. But yeah, Tarion, it is sized appropriately. It is gigantic. And especially like I like speculating on Fang Druid Summoner a lot early
Same.
in the draft.
Same.
And I go, okay, like I'm reasonably happy if I just have a Gibrick Omnivore to get.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, that's totally fine. You're just always going to play that combination. But if I ever get Tarion, I'm like, I do a little fist pump because I'm really happy.
Is this the first time in our career, Paul, where the magic number is 7? you got to get that 7th toughness in there to really be able to dodge all the removal.
It has to be, right? It's weird because I mean, it had to be intentional because they made Definitely. Crash and Burn and Siphon Fuel deal 6 damage when Siphon Fuel could have just been a kill target creature, gain 2 life for 5 mana.
Yes.
But
and there's
-6,
a lot of
-6. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of vehicles and creatures with 6 power. If you look also, that's a common, kind of good big creature place to hit. Like, I don't know. I always have it in my head that they don't necessarily want to go to 7 power because it's a 3-turn clock versus a 4. It probably doesn't matter. Like, that's not how these things actually play out. But there is, you can tell that there's a hesitancy to put 7 power. Like, that's kind of considered that's special, when you get at 7 power or above. Terry the World Tyrant is a playable plus. Yeah, very, very nice. All right. So we've got a lot to look forward to here, Paul. You and I will be in Chicago coming up. We're leaving day after tomorrow, and we'll be there on Friday in the morning to cover the booster draft for you. So if for those of you watching, if you want to watch professional level players playing with this set in just a few short days, Paul and I will be in the booth bringing that and following along with the draft to see what the players open up and what their take on the format is. Because already as things start to settle down, the question starts to become, how do you attack the best decks? Do you just lean in and do you just draft the best stuff and that's it? Or is there maybe an archetype that if left unchecked can be easily drafted and can beat some of the best decks? And that's the next level that we'll be taking you on during that broadcast and of course here on the podcast as well. That's going to do it for this one. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Paul is Haumph pretty much everywhere. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com, including all prior episodes of the show going back 15 years or something crazy. Like, we've been out forever. So yeah, you can find all those episodes there, all of our co-hosts along the line. Make sure you check out Paul's YouTube channel. There's a link in the description to that, and you can watch Paul drafting Aetherdrift. He's had multiple Aetherdrift videos up already at this point, so you can get a chance to look at how he approaches a brand new format, and specifically this one. And there's a lot to be learned from watching a player draft and then play out the games and build the deck as well, of Paul's caliber. So make sure you check those out. And we also want to say thank you to our patrons and to Ultimate Guard for supporting the show. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Okay, Paul, I have an important question. So you and I arrive on Wednesday.
We do.
We are going to immediately go to the hotel, drop our stuff off, and then go get pizza at Pequod's.
I mean, I wouldn't draw it up any other way, right? Like,
so the question
need to get to Helmfin.
This is classic, nice. Not that it's like a fancy place, but I mean, this is like not the chain. Like, there's a couple of these around. Chicago deep dish pizza. Big question. Do you consider it pizza? And if so, where does it rank on the pizza power rankings?
So I haven't actually had Pequod's because I didn't go to Chicago last year.
Oh my God.
So I will see.
Have you had Illuminati's or anything like that?
Yeah, I've had Giordano's.
Nope.
That one doesn't count.
So this is what so that one does count in many people's eyes, but I'll tell you, man, I've had both and that hits different. Giordano's
really
weighs like 6 pounds per slice and it leaves
40 minutes to cook.
A coma. This Pequod's also takes that long.
Oh,
but
okay.
It is they lean into the, is crust the right word? The breading, the crust part, but it's higher end. It's lighter. It's not quite it's still thick, but it's, doesn't hit quite as heavy as Giordano's.
Yeah. I will say I am not,
Are you a pizza snob?
No, I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm not from New York or whatever. You know, they're, I feel like a lot of people there really, really care very passionately about what the correct slice of pizza is. Look, there's a crust, there's tomato sauce, there's cheese. It's got all the same toppings. They just layer it slightly differently. So I will still consider it a pizza. I mean, they call it a pizza. Sure. It's a free country. You call it a pizza. I call it a pizza. Now, you know, once we get into like hot dog sandwich talks, then that's something else. But this is still, it's just got literally all the same ingredients. They just layer it slightly differently. So for me, I mean, you know, every time I eat one of these, I will enjoy it while I eat it, regret it afterwards, and then sleep for 10 hours. So it's always the same result. So. Yeah. And I love it. So I am excited to try, Pequods for the first time when we arrive. I told, because we got a good friend there, Rashad. He's always been a part of the coverage team. I told him, I messaged him. I said, hey, please make sure that I'm well fed on this trip. You live in Chicago, so just everything.
Rashad
let me know.
will take care of you. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah, he said there's like a breaded steak sandwich place that I need to try out.
He took me there when I visited him one time.
Was it good?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Oh man, okay. Yeah, I know Chicago's known for like pizzas.
Yeah,
I know they're known for the pizza and sandwiches.
Portillo's? Was that what
Portillo's?
I think that's what
a
it's
famous
called.
place.
Is
that where you get it?
I think so. Maybe that's a different place, but
that's a hot dog place. No,
they do have it, but they are also famous for these beef sandwiches, and they like dip them in a thing, and it's just gnarly. Yeah, and you can get one that has their hot sausage and the beef.
Okay, that's like 20-year-old Paul would like that one. Maybe that might be a little too much.
Yeah,
too old for that kind of sandwich now, probably.